Afternoon, everyone. So, a couple topics today. Not around my Warriors of Dark Gods list. Don't worry, though. This is the list I'm going to be taking to a tournament. It's around the idea of things you do at the table, tools you use, um, maybe even checklists for yourself. So, I guess three ideas would be some of the instruments and tools that I like to play with, some of the ideas I have around not like tells, like actions you can do that tip off your opponent of what you want to do, and some of my thoughts around that, and maybe like something like checklist, which I haven't done yet, but I have an idea for. So, where do I want to start? Let's start with tools. That's a pretty easy one. So, on UB, we have a lot of great tools that we use. Warhol as well. There's tons of things. There's arcs, there's the circles, there's being able to go move straight forward, see the lines. I mean, just this image right here tells you so much when playing the game, and also the ability to mark a unit. And I can tell you that back in the day, uh, I've been to five ETCs, and I don't think I've ever really truly marked units consistently as I do now, both in person and on UB, and having the ability to undo. There's no undo button in real life, but having the marker there really does help. Um, and so it's no surprise when you play in person, you kind of miss some of these features here. And I'm not trying to give tools. It's not about having a precision, the most precise game. You don't need to be to the millimeter 1 inch away from your models. You don't need to be perfectly in every little thing that you do. You know, there's a lot of intent where you talk to your opponent and say, "Oh, this should be just over 18 inches," and obviously you can check that it is. But it's more about just using tools to help your game plan and help to play a little faster. I think this is kind of like a speed thing. If we want to go back to everything, to beginning, one big problem online and in person is the speed of play. And we've talked about how, you know, not finishing games is really one of those things that pisses me off. Nothing ruins a Warhammer story of a game that ends where it only got to turn 4 for me. That's like the stupidest thing. Like, it's meant to be played 6 turns, and if you lose or win because it only went 4, that really bothers me. And there are some slow people out there, really slow, and some of them might listen to this, and I've called them out enough times. They're just really slow players, and it bothers the shit out of me. But sometimes they're slow for purposes that are okay. They're slow because they're moving and doing precise movements, and sometimes they're slow for other reasons. And both, moving precisely is important. And I think there is if you're going to take a bulk of your time in a tournament, if clocks were a thing like chess clocks, I would say the bulk of your time should be deployment, first turn, second turn. Those should be most of your time should be spent there. By third, fourth turn, it should be a little quicker. Things should be happening. The game flow should be going. You should know what you're doing. But if you have really good deployment, first turn, second turn, um, that's where you should really be spending your time. And that's where, sometimes I apologize to my opponent for a long first turn or a long deployment phase. But I kind of make up for it because I'm very fast in other aspects of the game. Like, I roll pretty fast. I get to combat to combat. It's easy to calculate what you need to do. Like, I think people are just generally slow for no reason. Like, rolling their spells, dispelling spells, doing combats. I know when people say, "Oh, we had a lot of combats. It took a long time. That's why we didn't finish the game." I'm kind of like, but combats don't really take that long if you're just efficient with it. People just want to yap about their rolls or something in between, or what could have happened or what didn't happen, as opposed to just let's go to the next combat and let's get it done. Anyway, I digress. That's not the point of this. So I just got some new tools in, or rulers and stuff. Nothing crazy. You've all seen these before. A lot of ETC players use these. These just have my name on them. We have the things down here that help you mark units. You have all types of rulers. You have these 6-inch ones, which are nice for panic, leadership, or what's nice about these is I like the 45 degree, because very often in person, what I'm doing is I'm setting up an arc on a unit, and I'm using a long stick to extend that arc so that I can see if my unit can get out. And if you just like, if this is on the board, it's not that hard. Like people think the more tools you have, the longer it takes you to do your movement phase and whatnot. But if you just set up a couple arcs with line of sight that's important to you, then you can do a lot of your movements without having to recheck everything. Because now that this line is permanently here, with one of these long ones, and I have like 4 arcs, then as I'm moving my units, I don't have to keep measuring your arc again or seeing this or that. And you can arc multiple units and say, all right, your arc is here, your arc is here. Can I get to this spot in the middle? If I can't, boom, bada bing, I can go on to measure something else. So I actually think tools like these, if used properly, can really help speed up decisions. For example, you're chaffing with the dogs like this, and you want to make sure that this unit back here can't be overrun into, something on UB where you would just look like this. You could see that they were here. It has to be the 12 is not possible. In person, you could just stick a 12-inch ruler next to your dogs and make sure that you don't touch it when you move up to it, stuff like that. So again, I think having proper tools makes things a lot faster. Something I had custom made for me are these proxy bases. I didn't get a 25 mil or a 20 mil because I don't run that many models that need it. But the only thing special about them is I had the centers marked, whether it's the cross of the 45 degree or in the center of the long bases. I have the center of each side marked so that, if you need to know if a unit is in the front or the flank, does it cover enough? Like, for example, this, right? If this was really close, so whether this is a flank or a front, you could put a proxy base here, this cab base, and you would see the center of the front marked, and you would know which arc it's in, for example. Or the same with like a single model. And I actually got 2 sets of these for myself, especially for the 50 and the chariot base, because a lot of times is you're measuring an elder, and if you actually look at my UV models, I actually put a center on it, right? I put a little dot where the center is, not only for flea paths, but for measuring. It's easy on UV because you just notice, oh, I moved 6 inches. But in person, when somebody takes a tape measure and puts it on top of an elder and downward angles it to a spot over here, you don't really know if you're moving the elder correctly. But having two of these, I can measure center to center very easily. And all I have to do is mark my elder with one of the corners, swap out the base, put the other base 16 inches away, mark that base's edge, and then move the model on top of it or whatever I need to do. It's pretty quick when you get used to doing it. It's really only for super important moves too. Obviously, if you can thread the needle, or if you're trying to get out of line of sight and it's like super obvious, you can just move. But sometimes it's not that obvious, and sometimes you want to do very specific things, and so having the right tools just makes it faster. Or they're very nice for you want to charge something and you want to see if you can clip, if you can set up a combo charge and you clip here. Do you hit anything or not? The sticks are really also good for that because you can line it up next to your base and see how far the overruns are. All that kind of jazz. But also, it's nice. It's nice for that, and also to make sure your opponent can't do that. I do that a lot. Where let's say you're doing this with your dogs, and you're worried about somebody like a herald clipping here and hitting something. You can go. You can use the proxy base and say, "Oh, look, there's no way in a straightforward path you would be able to hit me." And so things like that are very easy to check when you have the right tools and you get efficient with them. And eventually you just get smart and know how to use them properly. Of course, if you're not skilled enough to actually be looking for these things, then it doesn't really matter. You don't really need as many tools. But anyway, I was just excited to get them. So I wanted to talk about having the right tools. And obviously having spell cards, spell markers, wound markers. I don't like how I mark my wounds now. Dice and whatnot. Also, a little pet peeve, and people who play me in person know this. I hate people who roll more than like 20 dice. I think it actually takes. So I only play with 12 identical dice. I know people love to collect dice from ETCs. I have ETC dice in a bag somewhere. But I personally only like playing with 12 identical dice. And if I ever have to do batches, I just roll multiple sets. If I have 30 attacks, I'll roll 3 sets of 10. I'll roll them all the way through. I'll just roll hits, wounds, hits, wounds, hits, wounds, because it's easy and it's quick. And I've seen people scour for 30 dice and count it up perfectly and throw it on the board. And then they have to pick each little one out and it takes forever. And then sometimes they freaking pick that they have 10 hits and go pick up 10 new dice. And I'm just like, what the fuck are you doing? So I actually think a lot of people lose time because they do stupid shit like that. But I digress. That's just a pet peeve. I don't like it. I mean, I've gone to the point where if my opponent rolls like 30 dice, I start helping them pick stuff up if they're going too slow. I like start taking out their misses and stuff like that. But also, I like having 12 dice because if I have 10 attacks, then like I know if I hold 2 in one hand, I should have 10 in the other. Little shit like that. But that's just me. That had no point in what we were talking about. So yeah, having the right tools, A plus. Let's do it. And I do think things like this actually speed up the game once you get efficient with them. And they also, the ability to, like, I'll give you an example. If you didn't have a laser and you didn't have an arc of sight, now, or one arc of sight. Let's say you had one arc of sight and no laser. That's all you had was an arc of sight. Just imagine how extraneous it would be to check everybody's line of sight and make sure you were out of arc. And to the point that I think sometimes people just say, fuck it. I'm not even gonna check everything. They check some more important ones, but sometimes you get a little lazy because you just don't feel like, checking every little thing with one tape measure and one arc. Where if you have some, you have dedicated 12-inch things or different markers, or for example, let's say you want to check if a unit could wheel, around something. One of the easy ways would be, this is roughly 5 inches. It's pretty much 5 inches. You could take the 5-inch stick, lay it across it, and then kind of, I can't see my hand, but imagine you were holding the stick in front of those warriors and you could turn it as if they were wheeling, and that would be their frontage. And you could say, oh, if the 5-inch stick doesn't fit between here, this corner and here, then you can't make the wheel because this unit represents about 5 inches, stuff like that. Again, tools make it easier to check things, and the easier it is to check things, the less likely you are to ignore it or just accept it, right? Stuff like that. This kind of leads into a conversation about not giving away your hand, like literally. Well, not literally. Not giving away your plan. And I think this is there's a middle ground of people that just don't have a plan and there's nothing to give away, and people who have really intricate plans that, I don't know. I'll give you an example. A really example that just stood out to me once. You're sitting here with a unit, right? And let's just say you have something here. And the enemy has some weird plan where they're going to, I don't know, hit you with a unit here, hit you in the flank, and then like make you pursue this way so that you hit this unit, something like that. Nothing too complicated, but something enough that you might not see right away. Especially if you're like all the way over here or something. Like you might not see that play. You might say, oh, he's going to hit here and overrun and whatever. But I've seen people do this, and like, so let's say these were lusts and my option, I could flee. I've seen people like do very intricate like measurements, and they're like, okay, if you go here, then they go here. And this is on UB, happens a lot too. And I know somebody, Omer, mentioned in the chat of Discord, like, I wish I could have phantom models that no one could see but me, so I could do stuff like this. And he goes like this, and then he's like, okay, then I pivot like this, and then I'd be here. And like, it's something I might have never thought of, but I basically just scripted it out to my opponent that this is my plan. And so the plan then gets ruined by them fleeing the charge, right? Potentially. And let's say it was more deep than all of this, and it was like some really excellent plan. And so I think even in person, like there's a point where you don't have to script everything you do. You don't have to, if you want to check if this chariot can overrun here, how, what it looks like, you can just You can just put a base there in person. You can click here and look at 2 inches and say, all right, 2 inches is about here. Just, so this isn't the perfect way, right? But oh, I can make the overrun, but I could have seen that by going, oh, I'm pretty much within 2 inches. Stuff like that, like if you know how wide bases are. And I don't know, there's something like where people, I don't know, people just give things away. Like, give enough, like if you have to check something and be exact, be exact. And, there's times where I'm like, okay, I'm out of arc, I'm in arc, or however far charges are, or you want to be out of charge range. But I don't know, there's sometimes where I think you shouldn't check everything. Like sometimes with overruns, I think it can happen a lot too. Like I remember a game where I was thinking of doing some like cool double charge into flee a certain direction to hit something else, and I could have measured all the distances and said, "Oh, oh, this overrun would have been a 6 or a 7 or an 8." And that's fine, but I guess part of it is assuming that you think you can make it, and you think that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if the overrun, if you can make the overrun, like it's possible that you'll hit the unit or something like that, and the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to know if it's a 6, 7, or 8, and you really don't care, like you're going to do it no matter what. Then don't measure it if the opponent can do something about it. This is the big thing. It only matters if it could alter the opponent's choices. For example, armies that can flee. There's times where I'm like, oh, if he flees this charge, if he sees my plan and he flees the charge, I don't want to do it. It's almost like a game of cat and mouse, or I don't know what the game is. A game of who's smarter than who. I don't know. It's a game where it's like, if they see my plan, and maybe it's deep, then they can just flee it and screw me. But it might be deep enough that they don't see it. And like, are you going to play the game that they don't see it? Or are you going to play the game that they're going to see it and you don't do the move, or you do some other move to make up for it? And I think that sometimes people, to me, early on, more so, early on in my playing again, people would just give things away, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to flee that. Or, you see it. Or they do something with, like, wait till the opponent can't do anything anymore before you do it. That's probably my advice. Especially, and also when you move things, just have some confidence. Like, you don't have to dictate every reason. I'll give you a decent example, I guess. I know this isn't the most eloquently articulated. That's not right. Let's just say this. Oh, God damn it! I just had the right one. All right. Let's say you're like this, right? And we all know about the hitting from the rear, moving up, stuff like that, right? So let's just give for shits like this. And let's use, I don't know. Let's use a chariot. Right? And for whatever reason you go like this. Like, that if the chariot does 3 or 4 wounds, you're going to be able to see it. It's going to come into sight. Right? And maybe you want to put it like this no matter what. Or maybe it's like this. Let's say it was like this, and you got charged by, I don't know, minotaurs or ogres. And the ogres are probably going to do 2 wounds with impact hits. And so you put your unit like this. Instead of like explicitly telling your opponent, I can see you if you kill 2 models and you move up, just be confident in your measurements and don't say anything, because he might charge you, not realizing that the 2, like, he'll just think, oh, I'm going to wipe him out, I'm going to be out of line of sight. And he may not realize that, oh shit, if I kill 2, I'm now in line of sight and I have 2 different agility steps and there's nothing I can do. Right? Or even like 1, right? You could do it like this, where he might be like, oh, I'm going to charge here and I'm I'm out of his line of sight. And then you're like, oh, you killed one with impact hits. I can see you now. Stuff like that. You know what I mean? And of course, it depends on other things. Maybe you just stand forward for other reasons. But there are things like that where if you see it, you don't have to tell people. You don't have to give that away. Like, just make sure you measure correctly. In your head, know what it is, and be confident that you know what you're doing. And don't say anything. Because people say things all the time that like I've done moves like I said before, where you put something here, you put a base here, and they can see you put the base here, and you can show that you measured it. Obviously, if it's like a fraction of an inch, if you try to do it to like this exact level, then maybe. Or I'll give you another cool example that could probably come up. Let's say you were doing something like this, where you didn't want them to overrun into you, but you were also trying to do something where you had this aura of an inch, so that if he didn't overrun far enough, he would actually back up. So the enemy might be saying, oh, I'm going to overrun and get out of your line of sight on a whatever, and then in actuality, or something like this, where he's like, oh, I only need a 4-inch overrun, but in actuality, there's no chance he's gonna fly back here, right? Actually, you could actually do that much easier by going almost parallel, like this. All right, if you did this, and if this guy overran, he might be like, oh, I'm easily going to get out of your line of sight. But then he realizes too late. He's like in the overrun. I'm like, oh, you didn't break an inch. You're going to come back. It might be too late. And then you charge him. But if you were to dictate everything to him and been like, I'm going to go here so that you can't overrun into me. And if you do overrun, you're going to be within an inch of me and you're going to get backed up here. Then, like, you've just told him your whole plan, and then he might not fall for it, right? And there's no I mean, listen, I'm not going to lie to somebody. And if they go, oh, if they ask me, like, oh, if I overran here, would I keep going? Would I move back? I tell them, no, you would. But usually by the time this happens, sometimes they've already made the charge, and I'm not going to let them take the charge back at that point. So it's like with the champion talk I said. Give your opponents a chance to make a mistake. You don't have to tell them everything. You don't lie to them. That's another thing. I've told honest gameplay. Tell them the truth if they ask it. Tell them what they need to know. You know what I mean? You don't have to be like sneaky and be like, ha ha ha. But, you don't have to over explain to them different aspects of the game, right? You don't have to be like, oh, well, I'm going to charge and my champion's going to cover you and you're not going to get to attack, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes I explain after the game. But, there's a level of you don't have to play for them. That's probably a good way to put it. You don't have to play for them. But give yourself the opportunity to outplay them by not saying every single thing you're trying to do unless it needs to be said. Sure, there are moments where intent is needed and you need to be clear with enemies of like, oh, you can't reform out of my line of sight. That's fine. There's moments like that where it's fine. But there's also moments where, like, you don't need to say anything. Like, I'll give you one more example before I move on to probably a quick end topic. If I'm setting up this thing and I want to make sure that no matter what, let's just say, this is a common thing that gets people, right? Somebody charges and then they reform like this, and all of a sudden they're just out of line of sight, right? You thought you had this sweet counter charge set up, and then now all of a sudden, oh, they turn their base to the side and you can't see them anymore. Depending on which side you are, all you have to do to check this. If I'm this chariot player and I'm trying to see if it's possible, all I have to do is lay a unit right here. It doesn't even have to be this base. It doesn't have to be a chariot base because you know that this part doesn't matter. And check that line of sight. That's all you have to do. You don't have to say it. You don't have to put a chariot base. You could put a cav base right here. Check this line of sight. and you would know 100% that your chariot, because you know what it would look like. You have to be able to picture it, right? Oh, the picture of my chariot would be like that. That's it. Same with the other way. With this guy, all you have to do is put a chariot base right here, or cav base right here. Tilt your line of sight to this, and you know that he can't get out of your line of sight with a reform. You don't have to say it. You don't have to do shit. He might not think of this reform until after he charged, and then be like, "Oh shit, you can see me," um, or obviously he can't do anything about it because he can't move his model after the fact. But it could influence other things he does. You know what I mean? Like whether he flees charges, whether he stops certain spells. Like, don't give it away until it's too late. That's probably the last thing, right? Don't check anything unless it matters. Have you ever been like super excited, like to, or like I'll give you an example, another example. I'm full of examples. Somebody's mage, right? Let's say it was like this, or they're for a spell. You don't have to. Let's say he wanted to cast, I don't know, Hellfire. Well, it's 18 inches, right? And unless he, wait until the magic phase starts and then measure the 18 inches. Listen, if it's like a pixel and he clearly measured it in his movement phase, that's one. And he said, I want to be within 18 inches, that's one thing. But if he didn't measure anything and he's like an inch out, don't measure this in the movement phase. It doesn't matter. You're not dispelling any spells. When the magic phase starts, and now you have to know what's available to him, you can measure it and say, oh, you can't charge, you can't help fire my guy. That's it. You can say it. You can, he has no chance anymore to move it. Stuff like that. You know what I mean? But, sorry. The cat made a weird sound. She was dreaming. She's awake now. Yeah, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to measure arcs in their movement phase. Like, if it can wait. That's probably my best advice. It can wait. You don't have to measure everything. If they're trying to do something and they want your help with intent and stuff like that, sure. And there's been times where it's been close, and I'm like, I ask them, like, ooh, did you want to be seen here? Especially if they're trying. If you can tell that they're kind of looking at it, but if they didn't look for it, and it's like very obvious, like, on UB, for example, they just fucking, they put this unit here, and it's not even close, right? Then don't measure it. Don't say anything. UB, you can just click, which is fine. But in person, don't measure it. Maybe measure it in the magic phase, where they wait till they can't fix it. Don't give away your plan too early, as best you can. Yeah, that was it. Use your tools. Don't give away your plan. You can see I have a pregame checklist here. That's actually blank. But I do want to create like a checklist, like almost like a movement phase checklist, where at the end you can look at it and say, oh, have I checked all my arcs? Have I checked the charge ranges? Did I check that my spells are in range? Or you can read it during the movement phase. And things like champion position. We had a whole video on champion position, but you don't really think about it. It doesn't come natural to you. It's like, imagine when you started learning the game. You probably didn't check every arc of every unit. You probably didn't check all the charge ranges of every unit. That's something that kind of comes naturally. Oh, you didn't. And then as you get better, you start checking, combo charges and where people are going to line up, and making sure that, if they charge with just the chariot, they have to hit here, and so or just the herald, so I'm going to put my guy here so that he can't ever run into me. Like those things, you kind of build up to where it's natural to do it all the time. Same as we are now. Now everybody's an expert with that kind of stuff. And in person, people get lazy because there is no UB measuring the stuff. I think things like, or when you make, even there could be a step when you charge and say, look, one thing I get caught up a lot in is I double charge something, and you're all about that. I'm going to clip with the herald. I'm going to clip with the Herald and then hit 2 with this, right? Like, that's a very obvious thing to do in a lot of cases. And I'm not saying it's not a good plan. I'm just saying sometimes, like, sometimes I don't think about, like, oh, what if I don't know. When if it comes down to this guy and this guy alive, and now I'm not within an inch, and now I can't reform my chariot to the left because there's only, what if there's only one guy left, and all of a sudden we have to move over, we're not within an inch of each other, and now we can't reform how we want to reform. We don't have the space. Or when if, for whatever reason, I wanted this guy to turn. This is probably not the best example because that's a pretty big gap. But I guess this would be a better example. You double charge an elder. And sometimes people just naturally do stuff like this. And for whatever reason. And you don't think about, oh, I might not want to pursue or something. And all of a sudden, oh, I didn't put myself within an inch. So I can't actually reform like this. Whereas if I would have just gone right here, just within an inch, now I have free reforming or I have more ways I can reform like this and like this. You know what I mean? So I think there are, after you make charges, while you're doing movements, there can be a checklist of things saying, just remind yourself, just remember where you could be, where your combat reforms could be. Things like, do one more. And I do want to make a little checklist for this, including, I think, having the enemy's opponent's list and actually keeping a running tally of points. It's so easy in person to do stuff like this. I think I have Ben made a points tracker. And so all I have to do is put my list in, right? I put my list in, and I could put, let's say, the enemy list in. Let's just say it's a mirror match. And then I can say it's dead, and I can say it's shattered, and it's dead, and it's dead. And it adds up for me, and it shows me the score. And I have an idea of how many points I need to do different breakpoints. Because sometimes in turn 5, you realize it doesn't matter if my elder dies or not. I'm not going to get any more battle points. I'm not going to risk it. Or, for a better example, let's say I want to charge my elder at his elder on the last turn. And I realize we're in a situation like this, where, oh my god, trying to make it a sensible one, like this, right? Where even if his elder dies, I don't get any more points. But if my elder dies, I lose a point. Well, there's no reason to make that charge. I have nothing to gain from it. But I wouldn't have known that unless I knew these points ahead of time. And actually, somebody actually got mad at Ben for using a points tracker because that guy didn't have one, and so it was an unfair advantage to Ben because Ben knew what the breakpoints were and that things didn't matter, and that guy didn't know things didn't matter. So that guy couldn't make decisions based off of it, but the guy had all opportunity to do it himself. It actually is very important in the late game, and I think you should do it more. Also, in tournaments, it's not even that bad of an idea to turn like 5 because assuming that not much more is going to die, it gives you a sense, and you already did half the work of adding points. It's not like it's that hard to add it up really quickly. But also doing it on your own is pretty nice because if you know and the enemy doesn't know, obviously you tell them, but if you kind of keep it to yourself, it's kind of a nice thing too. Final example, when like thinking ahead, would be, if I hit with the, if I hit like, if I cover this corner, let's just say, oh, I don't want to get hit by 3 models. Well, I don't know. Let's just say you hit like this. You lose the opportunity if the knights hold to put your elder here and put this here, or even move the. Let's just say you charged in, you want to do something cool, and then the knights somehow hold, you whiff, right? You might have wanted to say, I want to put the elder, I want to switch places with some of the models. But you've basically lost any opportunity. Well, you don't really. If you went like this. If you went like this, you've lost pretty much any opportunity to do a lot of fancy tricks. You have some. Like you could go here, here, here. But if you just would have left like this corner open to begin with, you might have been able to go, oh, I'm going to put this guy here, this guy here, this guy here. Like, that's a perfectly legal reform. But you wouldn't have been able to do that if you didn't think ahead to maybe that millimeter matters or not. And sometimes it does matter, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have to take into account things holding it, whatnot. But that's always little improvements I see, especially when I have a lot of charges that I think are really good for me. I get kind of excited and I'm like, oh my God. And then I move them and I don't think about that little intro with reforms. I don't think about how models are going to be removed. That's a really big one. I don't want to do a big example here because that's always for combat removal. But if you really take a second and think about how combat models are going to be removed from combat, you can kind of see where the final position of units are going to be. And it might change how you charge. Like, it's very possible that, like, the placement, like this guy hitting, I'll just say here, and leaving this corner open and hitting here could have drastic implications on how combat goes and how combat, like, models get removed and what units get out of combat and stuff like that. So I think that's very important to think about, especially with like agility steps and stuff like that. Like, if you have your guy here and your herald here, and realize that the herald's going to kill 2 before this guy even gets to swing, so you've just lost out on all these attacks, and maybe you want that, maybe you don't want that. Maybe this was unit that wasn't going to break, and you just want to springboard this guy forward, stuff like that. Just thinking about things ahead of time. So I think there's a little checklist, and adding points during the game can really help make your decisions better on the table without slowing down the game. You can add up points while they're moving and stuff like that, and you can take a second in your movement phase to breathe and just look at the board and say, is my champions where I want it? And remind yourself, because eventually it becomes natural. I think that's the thing with like anything. It's, if you do it enough, it becomes really natural to check it all the time. Same with all the other little things. Yeah, that's it. And if you just spend less time rolling batches of 60 dice, you'll have a lot more time to do things like this without people getting pissy. People get pissy at me sometimes for taking a while and for turn 1 or deployment. They don't really get mad, but sometimes I hear about it. And I'm like, bro, we finished with like an hour left. Like, I don't have trouble finishing games. So don't complain to me when my turn 1 takes a little longer because I'm thinking. But I do think these tools will help me go faster. Anyway, that's just some ramblings for today. Thanks for listening.